It's been a few months since I gave an intermittent fasting update. So since there's still a pretty good sized group of intermittent fasting zealots out there, I thought it was time to just hit a couple highlights. So just as a reminder, with intermittent fasting, there is no one size fits all. Lots of people will talk about and say they're doing intermittent fasting, but honestly, saying you're doing intermittent fasting is like saying you drive a motor vehicle. Okay? What kind of motor vehicle? How big is it? How much horsepower? How many people does it seat? What color is it? And so on. Intermittent fasting is like that. There's so many different varieties. There's so many different types. It's unbelievable. Okay? It really is. It's like, how many cars are there? What types of car? Is it even a car? Is it a truck? How many wheels does it have? Really, it's like that. So let me quickly go through this graphic, which shows some of the more common intermittent fasting flavors. So we've got normal eating, okay? That's pretty much what you do when you're not doing any kind of intermittent fasting. You're just eating normally. You're not doing any kind of restriction. You're just not doing anything at all. And the next one down is alternate day fasting. So you do some kind of fasting. It may not be, by the way, when they say fasting, it may not be that you're just on a water fast where that's the only thing you're consuming. So that gets confusing too. But alternate day fasting would be eating, quote unquote, normally, let's say on Monday, and then doing some kind of fasting on Tuesday and normal on Wednesday and some kind of fasting on Thursday and so on. Alternate day modified fasting. Oh, Lord. So in this case, they would be referring to alternate day fasting as probably more true fasting, where it's water only. And alternate day modified fasting would be, you're not really fasting on those alternate days, but your calories are probably under 500 a day. Okay? So again, that's not confusing at all, is it? Yeah, it is. Then you got the 5-2 diet, which is basically 5 days of the week you eat normally or whatever. And 2 of the days you're eating 500 or 600 calories a day. So that's not even a real fast. It's more of a very low calorie diet on those 2 days. So 5 normal, 2 low calorie. That's the 5-2 diet. And fasting mimicking diet. That's where we're not really doing it alternate day, but we're dieting at a very low calorie, VLCD, very low calorie diet level, probably, in that 500 to 800 calorie range. And so it mimics allegedly some of the things of a true water fast. So it's a fasting mimicking diet, FMD. And we've got weekly intermittent energy restriction, where it's 1 week of eating normal, another week of whatever. So it's every other week you're doing some kind of energy restriction. And then you've got time restricted feeding, where it's very, very common in the intermittent fasting world, where you've got maybe 16 hours where you don't eat anything and 8 hours where you can eat whatever. Okay? So you might eat only from noon to 8 p.m., right? Anything before noon, nothing. Anything after 8 p.m., nothing. Okay? Time restricted. Or it could be in 18-6. Okay? So it's 18 hours of not eating, 6 hours of eating. Okay? They've done 24. 20 hours of not eating, 4 hours of eating. They have done a 23-1. 23 hours of not eating, 1 hour of anything you want. And a lot of times that's referred to as OMAD, 1 meal a day. Bottom line is they keep compressing the amount of time that one eats because people keep finding ways to get in the calories they want to maintain. No matter how many hours you give them. You give them 8 hours to eat, they'll eat the calories, that's basically keep them in maintenance or probably gaining weight. For most people, not all. You give them 6 hours to eat, they'll figure out how to get the calories in. You give them 4 hours, they figure out how to get the calories in. 2 hours, they get it in. 1 hour, 1 meal a day, they will figure out how to get in 2,000-3,000 calories in that 1 hour. Anyway, that's a summary of kind of the different types of the basics of intermittent fasting. All right, so again, not getting into all the nitty-gritty details, let me just give you the summary that is really the summary that I gave the last time I taught this as a separate lesson. So I'm going to summarize the evidence-based pros and cons before I discuss a couple newer studies. So here we go. So an advantage with intermittent fasting is that there are clear boundaries for when to eat, not necessarily what to eat. Long fasts greater than 14 hours may actually improve health, may. Is it better than calorie restriction? Inconclusive, but you're going to see in a minute that really we're kind of finding it is inconclusive, but we're kind of tilting toward no, it's no better. It might make a caloric deficit harder. or easier. There are dozens of types. There's not a one-size-fits-all. It can create fatigue, dizziness, and mood disturbances. Yes, it can. If you're on diabetic drugs, then you should only do intermittent fasting with a medical doctor's supervision. And if you're elderly, it may increase the risk of falls. It is contraindicated in children, pregnant people, and people performing heavy physical work. In other words, it's not recommended for these people. There could be a loss of muscle mass if protein is insufficient. I mean, if you're going to eat one meal a day, are you going to follow the dietary recommendations for protein requirements, which is, if you're trying to lose fat and you're trying to keep muscle, then we want to have about 1 gram of protein per pound of fat-free mass, or you could say 1 gram of protein per pound of weight at what a healthy weight would be for you. Okay, say a BMI of 25. So if you're 230 pounds and you were saying, how much protein do I need? And if you said a healthy weight for me, a BMI of 25 or whatever is 150 pounds, then you need about 150 grams of protein a day. Anyway, you could have a loss of mass if your protein's insufficient. So are you going to get, in that example, 150 grams of protein in your 1 meal a day or your 2 meals a day? Probably not. Could it trigger eating disorders and binge? Yeah, because if you you keep compressing that window to 1 hour, 2, 3, 4, 6 hours, and the brain just says, you're not going to mess with me. You are not going to trick me. So often, again, not for everyone, for some limited percentage of people, intermittent fasting can work, no doubt about it. And it can work as well for some people as continuous energy restriction. So I'm not saying this is everything, but if you're a triggered eater or you have suffered from any kind of binge eating, then could it trigger those issues? Yeah, because you got to eat. Man, I haven't eaten in 18 hours. I get a 6-hour window. Go, go, go. And that's what happens. All right, so it affects men and women differently. It may be better in men. Medications, diabetes, low blood pressure, or disordered eating, you should only do intermittent fasting under a doctor's care if you got any of those things. Most of the research is short and a very small sample size. Okay, that's the summary of intermittent fasting. Evidence-based summary of intermittent fasting. So in this November 2021 study, titled The Comparison of Effects Between Continuous and Intermittent Energy Restriction in Short-Term Body Weight Loss for Sedentary Population, a randomized, double-blind, controlled trial, which is like the creme de la creme of study setup, the authors found, by the way, this study was short. It was just 28 days, as most of them are. They're short, and there were only 26 people in it, and as most of them are, the numbers of people in the studies are small. So we got to take all that into consideration. But what these guys found was this. Here's their summary. No statistically significant difference was reported in the effect between groups. And the groups, by the way, were continuous energy restriction, that's your CER, and intermittent energy restriction, your IER. So no significant difference between groups, neither as well the intake of total calories, 3 major nutrients, and individual plan retention. So calories that weren't different, macros weren't different, plan retention wasn't different. And both CER and IER, continuous energy restriction and intermittent energy restriction, are effective and safe energy restriction strategies in the short term. Daily energy intake and physical exercise are important to both IER and CER. All right, so basically no difference. And that last sentence really says it. Daily energy intake and physical exercise are important to both. So there's no, Lucky Charms, magically delicious, wave a magic wand because you're doing intermittent fasting. Bottom line, as that last sentence says, and the researchers are basically making that point, that no matter what, calories are king, but they're not the only thing. You have to create a caloric deficit. You got to reduce your calorie intake some, increase your output some, either or some combination of both, which is what we typically recommend. Bring your calories down some, bring your exercise up some, and create that true caloric deficit. It is the only way. All right. In this 2021 study, researchers looked at 205 overweight or obese subjects to compare the effects of intermittent energy restriction with those of continuous energy restriction on blood pressure control and weight loss in overweight and obese patients with hypertension, so high blood pressure, during a 6-month period. Their conclusion, IER and CER are equally effective for weight loss and blood pressure control. There were favorable improvements in body composition, HbA1c, and blood lipid levels with no differences between groups. So that's that one. And in the final study for this particular update today, this week, the purpose of this 2020 study was to examine the effects of moderate, intermittent energy restriction versus continuous energy restriction in a population of resistance-trained females. I thought that was interesting because it was resistance-trained females. All right, so they're doing a moderate intermittent energy restriction with continuous energy restriction, comparing those two plans. Their conclusion, in resistance-trained females seeking to optimize their physiques, moderate intermittent energy restriction, MIER, does not improve the efficiency of fat loss and has no effect on fat-free mass and resting metabolic rate. They basically had said, too, they had said in another part that they don't believe it's going to hurt, but it did not improve, and it did not show any improvements over continuous energy restriction. Okay? So, like about anything, if you really want to find something to support your position, no matter how cuckoo for Cocoa Puffs your position may be, you'll find it on the net if you dig for it. You're really going to find what you're looking for. You know, there's a saying, we don't see the world as it is, we see the world as we are. We will find whatever we already believe. I try very, very hard to keep my mind open to that fact that we are likely to see what we already believe. And so I a lot of times will go and look specifically for the counter. I will try to find, things that counter the way that I would normally think. But as a whole, by and large, as more research compares whatever flavor of intermittent fasting, because remember, you can't just say, I'm doing intermittent fasting. Oh my gosh, I drive a car. What kind of car? What color is it? All that stuff, like I said before. But when researchers are comparing whatever flavor of intermittent fasting with continuous energy restriction, which continuous energy restriction is really kind of like what we do here at LLU. Bring the calories down some overall, bring the output up some, create that caloric deficit. Anyway, the researchers are finding, as a whole, by and large, little to no differences in fat loss, especially in studies where they follow people for a year or longer. You're going to find all kinds of things that don't mean much to me in these 2-week, 4-week things. Whatever. It's interesting. It's fine. It's a start. Talk to me in 6 months. Talk to me in a year. And let's see what's really going on with the people. Because it's why we have the maintainers board. Lose the weight one more time for the last time. Interesting to see some of the other things, but the longer term to me is where it's at. Anyway, it all seems to balance out when we look at the longer term aspects and comparisons of intermittent fasting or intermittent energy restriction and continuous energy restriction. When that window of analysis grows and lengthens and we get out to that year, it all seems to, kind of balance out in the wash. Okay? All right.